We're in Islamabad at Hotspot, where we'll be speaking to Shehryar Fazli, the author of Invitation. Hi Shehryar.
Hi Nina.
Thank you for joining us at Nilofar's Corner. Can fiction writing in Pakistan be apolitical?
That's a very good question. I think that given how much politics affects our private lives, it would take a very conscious decision by a writer to say, okay, I'm going to write a story set in Karachi, set in Islamabad, set in Lahore, Peshawar, that isn't going to acknowledge the politics, given how much of an impact politics has on just about every corner of private life in this country.
But the lingua franca, we are being told, is Urdu. The history of Urdu in the subcontinent, as you know, is very similar to English, and especially to the geography of Pakistan. Why do you think Urdu has somehow become the lingua franca of Pakistan and English remains the language of the elite?
Urdu and English are both imported languages, and both very much elite languages, but Urdu became the link language in a very linguistically and culturally disparate body politic. That said, English has become the language of the global economy, and I think the elite of Pakistan now, unfortunately, are trained in English and not really trained in Urdu. So the language that I speak is primarily English, whereas my Urdu has suffered a great deal, and I think this is the case with a lot of people in our generation, and something that our parents and their parents deeply regret. Coming back to the theme of literature, given that literature in any country, in any society, is captured by the elite, and as a result, there isn't the same industry around Urdu that there is around English. And as a result, there's no forces breathing fresh life into Urdu the way there is into English.
Language politics has always played a big role in Pakistani social cultural history. In the 50s and in the 70s, we had huge movements of language. In fact, unfortunately, we also saw the breakup of Pakistan as well as a result of language. Do you think this language politics continues and is also perhaps reflected in our fiction writing?
Yes, I think the regional languages, if we can call them that, Sindhi, Pashto, and so on, are also dying languages in the sense that they're not taught in a national curriculum. It is this tendency to suppress diversity. I think that Pakistan's greatest asset is its diversity and its pluralism, but unfortunately for those who govern, diversity is seen as a threat to the unity of the country, and this has been the case, as you're implying, since day one. So I think the language politics continue and are still wreaking a great deal of damage.
I don't actually see, contemporary Pakistani fiction doing the novel on the war or the internal angst or the existential crises.
Well, that's the point I'm making is that right now, no. But then again, there aren't many novels or short story collections that we can point to yet. I mean, there is at the end of the day just a handful. But what we do see is that more and more people are turning to writing. And that is what opens up the possibilities. Whereas in the year 1999, when Mohsin Hamid came out with Moth Smoke, that book, and it's a wonderful book, it got a lot of attention, not only because it is a wonderful story, but I believe also because it was the first novel that started dealing with issues of contemporary Pakistan that young people deal with.
Do you think English fiction writers, their audience is primarily Pakistan?
Well, no. I think that they're being widely read in other parts of the world, the US, the UK. The books are being translated into many European languages. So I think it has and is building a global audience. However, I will admit that what I'm most curious about would be the reaction from a Pakistani reader, particularly with my first book, where, as we said before, I was capturing this era that I'd never seen. And so I was very curious about what people who'd lived in that time would think. Did this somehow capture what they saw and felt, and that, because it's easy to tell a American reader or any non-Pakistan reader that this is what Karachi was back then, and they'll believe you. But what about the Karachiite who lived then? Will they be persuaded? And
we constantly are being told that Pakistan invests very little in our education, and as a result, few readers. So how do you see the future of fiction writing and or reading in Pakistan?
The kind of fiction that I write and the kind of fiction that some of these other Pakistani writers write can be categorized as literary fiction. Now, literary fiction by its nature is a very elitist form in any country, and it doesn't sell the same quantities as thrillers and horror stories. In America, John Grisham will sell far more than Philip Roth. So when you enter into this game of literary fiction, you're already accepting a very limited audience. That's sort of built into the very nature of what you're doing. So I think the question goes far beyond what the low investment in education means for Pakistani fiction. I think it has much more serious consequences for just what it means for people's empowerment, people's opportunities, and it's a decision that the government has to make, not to rescue fiction, but to rescue the Pakistani public.
So would you say English fiction writing is primarily a reflection of the elite, or have we managed to also reflect a middle class English-speaking experience as well?
There's a quote from, I believe it's George Eliot, who said that fiction is experience transformed. And I'm with George Eliot on this. So I would say that it's not so much an amalgamation, so much as using experience as the raw material with which to shape one's fiction. Now, I also think that the fiction writer needs to do some hard work as well. If you merely stick to your own little enclosed sphere, your fiction will also be very limited. I think regardless of what our socioeconomic backgrounds are, if you want to more fully capture a society, you've got to do the hard work of going beyond your areas of comfort.
So my final question, as a Foreign Office kid, has that experience reflected in any of your writing?
Yes, I think the places that one travels to, the places that one grows up in our case as Foreign Office kids, it is places, it's not the place, have a huge impact certainly on consciousness. I think where they've influenced my writing the most is in terms of the characters that I've come across in this life of just traveling around. And I'm a writer who really likes to capture characters on the page, more so than plot and fancy language. It's really characters who, for me, make literature what it is.
Thank you so much, Shahryar, for being with us today at Nilofar's Corner.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm from Karachi. My entire clan resides here. So as a child, my father would bring me here, and this bookshop defines in my mind what a bookshop should be.
So how do you see yourself as a Pakistani English language storyteller?
बीबी, एक तरह से ये अहमकाना सवाल है, इसलिए कि हमें अंग्रेज़ी से कोई 100, 150, 200 साल से शिकवा रहा है कि अंग्रेज़ी हमें बर्बाद कर देगी। अभी हाल में पिछले हफ्ते हम एक मारूफ सहाफ़ी से मिले जो कह रहे थे अंग्रेज़ी हमें बर्बाद कर चुकी है। तो हिंदुस्तान ने अंग्रेज़ी को कौमी ज़बान बनाई, वो बर्बाद हुए, और हमारा ताल्लुक़ अंग्रेज़ी से बहुत पुराना है। जो पहले हिंदुस्तानी ने अंग्रेज़ी में किताब लिखी थी वो बिहार के थे दीन मोहम्मद साहब। उनने लिखी थी, एक ट्रैवलॉग लिखा था जो कहलाता था द ट्रैवल्स ऑफ दीन मोहम्मद। सो आवर रिलेशनशिप with English goes back to 1794.
Are there any distinguishing features that make English language fiction writing specifically Pakistani, or is it just part of the genre of post-colonial literature?
I think what's exciting about Pakistani fiction in English is that no two books are alike.
English language fiction writers in Pakistan, who is their primary audience?
You know, when R.K. Narayan was writing Malagudi Days in the 60s, this question was posed to him. This question was posed when Rushdie published Midnight's Children. As far as I'm concerned, Homeboys was a bestseller in Karachi, in Pakistan. It was a bestseller in India. So I know that people are buying the books, and so it would seem to me, from anecdotal evidence, not empirical evidence, that English books sell very well.
Karachi is known for its guns and goons and very little governance. Now, in the world of fiction, how are you going to treat Karachi?
Karachi has always been a city of immigrants. There was nothing here 300 years ago. So there were no original settlers. And each set of immigrants displace the other. And so throughout history, there have been successive waves. Goans and Parsis came to Karachi, and that keeps changing. So my novel takes a long view and contends with where we have come from and where we might be going.
I read somewhere once that you don't like to comment on politics.
Homeboy is a very political novel. It's a very sharp critique of America, of Americana, as well as a celebration of the immigrant experience. So it's not as if I stay clear of politics. I actually dive head first into sort of political discourse.
Do you read Urdu literature?
I got Sachal's Kalam, which is even more exciting, which I will have more difficulty with in terms of sort of its more ornate style. I don't have the stamina to read Aag Ka Darya, which is right here on the shelf. So I'm familiar with Urdu literature and I do draw inspiration from it, but it takes a lot of stamina to negotiate a novel like Aag Ka Darya.
People make reference to language barrier, perhaps they're making reference to a class barrier.
Whether we like it or not, Urdu is the lingua franca of Pakistan.
Most Pakistanis don't associate themselves with Urdu.
So when I go into rural Sindh, I speak Urdu. When I have been to Gujranwala, I haven't been to rural Punjab. When I've been to Gujranwala, when I've been to Multan, I speak Urdu. I was in Balochistan a year or two ago, and I spoke Urdu. So, you know, there are people who don't care for Urdu, and people who champion regional languages. I think there's no poetry that talks to me like Shah Abdul Bhattai's poetry. I read him in translation. Bhitt Shah's poetry I'm not familiar with Bulle Shah's, but Bhitt Shah's poetry speaks to me like no other poetry does. So I think regional languages are very important, but there is a lingua franca here, and whether you like it or not, it is Urdu. You can say English is a regional language.
Thank you so much, HM, for that. Thank you for joining us at Nilofer's Corner, and I look forward to reading your second book. We're sitting with Ajmal Kamal, the writer, the publisher, the editor of an Urdu magazine called Aaj. Thank you for joining us, Ajmal, at Nilofer's Corner. What's the feedback from those who read, you know, from our coastal areas or from interior Sindh or, you know, maybe the northern areas?
Yeah, I have observed a very interesting thing. In the last 10 or 15 years, a number of Urdu readers have come up who are first generation readers.
First generation readers?
Readers. Many of them are first generation literates also. So that changes the profile of a typical Urdu reader. They are very keen readers, and some of them will keep calling me to find out when our next publication is coming. And a lot of stuff that is published in Aaj is translated from other languages.
For example?
For example, Hindi and Farsi and Arabic.
And do they read Aaj, both like an Arabian audience or an Indian audience?
Yes.
Is it online?
No, it is not online as yet.
But our resistance, our kind of literature, as we call it, of any form, whether it's secular or not secular, progressive or non-progressive, but resistance, lower middle class or a class resistance literature manifest in fiction as well.
Well, actually, if we talk of creative fiction, I would say that the entire body of fiction of any merit consists of progressive literature. So everything, I mean, there is an artificial divide between, which has been created between progressive and so-called modernist fiction. But I put both of them in the same category, whether you call it modern literature or progressive literature.
You don't make a distinction between progressive and modern?
No.
Modern is time. It's contemporary.
No, I'm talking about the terms. I'm talking about the terms.
Yes.
When this kind of literature was introduced in the 1930s, it was called, first of all, it was called Naya Adab. It was new literature. Literature which was being written in the new times, as well as literature which dealt with new subjects of the population which was never represented in literature, and also it experimented with new forms. So that still holds.
There is an automatic assumption that English fiction writers have a parallel audience other than the Pakistani audience.
They are working in a different tradition. So they have in my experience, they will have a competition with literature written in Latin America, for example.
How would you see change? What would be the stimuli of having a vibrant Pakistan which is reading Urdu and English fiction?
Well, I can only pin my hopes to these new readers of serious fiction who are first generation readers. But I don't think they would be in such large numbers.
This goes into my final question of who publishes in this country? Who finances publishing? Who are the publishing houses?
English fiction in Pakistan has got a boost because of our location next to India. which has become a big market of English books. So many of our writers have been published by Indian publishers. If we take religious literature, which is the bigger chunk of private publishing, mostly they are associated with madrasas or religious organizations who have their local and international sources of funding. Then there is another chunk of textbooks. The textbooks are published by private publishers. Earlier it used to be for textbook boards. Now they publish for private school chains also. There is a body of popular Urdu fiction also, which includes that genre of Islami Tariqi novel or Jihadi novel, and also women's fiction. I mean, I'm not talking about the feminist or serious fiction, but popular fiction consumed by females.
Is society overly interested in religion?
I don't see this proportion to change much in near future.
Thank you very much, Ajmal, for joining us at
Well,
Muslim's
thank you
Corner.
so much.
That was Ajmal Kamal discussing Urdu and English fiction in Pakistan today. To sum up, what he was saying was Urdu fiction in Pakistan is primarily either the body of religious fiction or religious publication, or that which is providing basic education to schools and colleges, leaving very little space or financial support for the world of fiction. This, in a country which does not invest in education, is inevitable. So we hope with the investment of education that the world of Urdu and English fiction will open up to many more Pakistanis.